So a wealth of experience. Much of Dan's focus has been on the issues of watershed planning, lake water quality protection, wild rice lake protection, Camp Ripley's Army compatible use buffer, and private forest management. He has spent as much time as possible enjoying the family property in the Sand and Bowstring Lakes area of northwestern Itasca County since he was a youngster. And if you ask him if the fish are biting on Bowstring, he will only answer if you're talking about bass. Right?
Correct.
So welcome, Dan Seward.
Thank you, Paula. Well, like I said in the last group, I'm not a water quality expert. I'm not a planning expert, but this is about kind of both those things. So it's water quality and water planning and a little bit of forestry too, and I'm not a forester either. I'm a geographer. So it's those things implementation more efficient and effective. And so, but I do need to talk a little bit about what is a watershed. You probably all know what a watershed is. Maybe should I just skip this entirely, or should I talk about it now? No. Okay, all right. Well, a watershed, simply put, is just the area of land that contributes flow to a common point or an outlet. So in our nice little drawing here that came right off the internet, here's our outlet, and this land here, when it rains or snows, eventually it warms up. Right? Even if it's snow, and it turns into water, and it runs off the land at various stages. Watersheds are incredibly complex. There's all kinds of watersheds, flat ones, steep ones, sandy ones, clay, forested, agricultural, and everything in between. And our watersheds up here, just to make them even more interesting, of course, are full of beaver. So, you know, once I thought I was going to canoe just a couple 100 yards down to where this little creek went into the Little Pine River in Crow Wing County. It was only a quarter mile. 7 dams later, I turned around and went back. There were 7 beaver dams in there in just a quarter mile. So our watersheds are complex. And, of course, some of the water in these watersheds is even more complex. So, okay, we've got catchments, or the smallest units of watersheds, where 2 or more catchments form subwatersheds. A group of subwatersheds form a watershed, and then a group of watersheds forms a basin. So we have this nested thing from real small watersheds, and then moderately small watersheds, which you'll hear me use the term minor watersheds. That's what I mean, and there's definitions for all this stuff. There's the federal definition through EPA. There's the state's definition, which is very similar to the federal, but a little different, from DNR waters, and so on. So the terms we use here are pretty important, but I'm going to use them somewhat loosely, but show you a little bit how that hierarchy works. But what I was going to say is, especially in a sandy, forested situation like we have here, thank goodness, in most of the upper Miss, most of the water goes right in the ground. You know, it's amazing how little runoff there is in a forested watershed. It's almost zero. Well, this of course means you've got a groundwater driven system. Well, that has a profound effect on water quality, and it's beneficial, of course, because you've got all that groundwater material, all that soil material filtering everything that's come down. So this watershed, the water that falls near the stream might make it to the outlet in a day or two. The water that goes into the ground might come out of this hillside here in a year or two. And then it enters the stream and it merely goes about its business going downstream just like the rest of the water, but it's a year or two later. So anyway.
Where are the lakes?
Pardon?
Where are the lakes?
The lakes.
Lakes, L-A-K-E-S.
Well, there's one. Okay. But this is just a generalized version.
Okay.
Let's see if that has that. Now we went backwards. There's no lakes in there. But the other thing I like about this one is this shows a little bit of rougher terrain on this side of the watershed. This is more moderate, like around here. And even this is probably a little exaggerated. Minnesota, most of Minnesota doesn't have a lot of slope. The Northeast does, by Lake Superior, the Southeast does, but most of it doesn't. And so, you know, our watersheds are vastly different from those out west. Also, though, even within the state, southern Minnesota, highly altered prairie watersheds that are heavy soils, and nearly all the storage has gone out of those watersheds. The lakes, a lot of the lakes are drained. Most of the wetlands are drained. Well, that was all storage that slowed down that pulse of water after precipitation events. That's all intact up here. So we've got sandy soils, a huge plus for moderating runoff. Forests on top of the sandy soils, and then our natural storage is also mostly still intact. So that produces high quality water. That right there in a nutshell is why most of north central Minnesota has good water quality. And as you move out of that system, either to the Red River Valley in the north, high sedimentation problems, and turbidity problems, and the same thing in southern Minnesota.
So Dan, do you sense that southern Minnesota will ever try to mitigate what they wrecked?
Well, we are all the time, to the tune of millions and millions of dollars now, thanks to the legacy and the referendum that passed in 2008. But, you know, it's not that easy to put it back together. That's a youthful landscape, because the glaciers were off not that long ago, so it's a very young landscape. We took the storage out of it, the wetlands, and now as you increase the runoff from those watersheds, the little stream that was there wasn't built to handle that kind of runoff. So those streams are down cutting. And now we're tiling more, which increases the runoff more, so the stream down cuts more. And so that's a hard thing to put back together. I think what we should do work down there, but I think we should be very, very careful and targeted in where we do it. And there's some watersheds are better places to try than others, I guess. Yes, sir.
What's the impact of converting your forest land to manicured or cultured lawns, turf?
I think we'll get to an example of that, but yeah, you can have a forested watershed with all that storage and all those wetlands and stuff up in the headwaters. There's hardly any slope, you know, but if you super intensively develop right next to the lake, that can be enough, even though you've got a favorable situation off the lake, to override that moderating influence of all that timber and stuff in the watershed. I've got an example of that.
Dan, can I ask you one more question on southern Minnesota? You say be very careful.
Well,
You mean be very careful so the work can be productive?
Yes.
Or be very careful so you don't go backwards?
no, I mean, let's find the places to work there that are most productive.
Okay, thanks.
Because again, I think one of my mantras is we treat these watersheds like they're all the same. They're vastly different in some cases. Some of them are similar, but sometimes they're surprisingly different. Lindbergh and I worked on one once. Where I learned this was in Stearns County, working on Lake Coronis. And a little watershed on this side of Lake Coronis, they have very good animal feedlot inventories down there. The animal count, they have a count on how many cattle were in the minor watershed of this side of the lake. 70. The little minor watershed on the other side of the lake, 7,000. Well, we know cattle produce phosphorus. And there were 100 times more cattle in that minor than this minor, and we're treating them all like they're the same. You see? They're not. It's our job to look at the minors, study them, and figure out what the differences are. And then we'll be more efficient and effective with our money, I think, because there isn't enough money to go around. Even with the referendum, it's a huge state, thousands and thousands of water resources and habitat opportunities. You know, there's a lot of money, but it's still limited. So anyway, let's just look real quick on the, if you start with the national scene, and the HUC hydrologic unit is what that HU means, and you'll hear the term HUC 10 or HUC 8, or it's all organized, how we talk about watersheds, and so HUC just means hydrologic unit code, and it's a USGS federal term. So we start with the national scene. Oh, I got to back up. Minnesota, of course, even though we're here in the middle of the continent, we have water going down out of southern Minnesota, the Mississippi River to the Gulf, off the eastern part of Lake Superior through the St. Lawrence Seaway to the Atlantic, and water going north through the Red up to Hudson's Bay. I got to say this again. My dad told me when I was a little kid that when he was a little kid, growing up in Minneapolis, in grade school, they taught him that Minnesota was the rooftop of the nation. That's the only time I've ever heard anybody say that. But they did used to teach that, and it's true, it's totally accurate. It's not the only rooftop of the nation because, of course, there's the Great Divide out in the Rockies. But it is a rooftop of the nation. That's kind of cool. So anyway, now we've come in a step to Minnesota. Here's another step closer. The major basins of the state. Only water coming into Minnesota is right there from South Dakota and down here to Iowa. Otherwise, all our water is going out of the state. Pretty unique. Now we've come in a notch to the subbasin perspective, and we're moving in. You can see Leech Lake there, and Winnie, and Grand Rapids right here, and Brainerd's down here, and so on. So now we've moved in a notch and terms of rivers we're more familiar with. And then they're talking about this example that they put on the website was about Lake Carlos, which is right out here in western Douglas County. The headwaters of the Long Prairie River, which flows into the Crow Wing, which then joins the Mississippi just below Brainerd.
How many watersheds do we have in Itasca County then, Dan?
Minor watershed.
I don't know how you...
Crow Wing County, what I call a minor watershed, which I think is a Huck 14. Crow Wing County has 125. Itasca County is a much bigger county, so I'd say about 200. I think Cass has about 200. So that's minor watersheds. Major watersheds, about parts of 6, I would say. Because some is going, a little tiny bit is going up to the Red River Valley through the northwest corner of the county. The Big Fork, of course, going up to the Rainy, and a little bit going out to the east to Lake Superior, you know, in the Mississippi, of course. So there's at least 4. Okay. That's part 1. Any questions on what's a watershed? It was just a thumbnail, quick, hitting high spots deal. Now we're going to talk about water planning. And when I talk about water planning, I'm talking especially about county water planning. And counties have this process. I think Minnesota is the only state in the country that has this. And that is, every 5 years they write county water plans. And I'll get into the history of that in a little bit. The reason this slide's on here is this guy was a genius, Jimmy Doolittle. He was a real genius. And he, when he couldn't win the barnstorming races crossing the country in the early days of aviation, he won them for a while. Then the competition got better and he couldn't win them anymore. So what he did was he invented high octane fuel. So the guy was an actual genius. He did things that supposedly couldn't be done. And he'd figure out through the math and everything how to do them, and he'd do them. Well, and he makes this great quote, and this is very central to water management in Minnesota, where we've got all kinds of really high quality water in the northern part of the state, and much of the state is in a restoration mode where it's not high quality anymore. And so it's human nature to fix things that are broken, not prevent things from getting broken. That's the point of this slide. And we do it all the time, and without a cause, how do you rally people? It's not easy. Looking ahead is not really in our DNA that much. So this comes back to trends. Water quality trends are very useful and helpful, and you can have Maggie and folks and PCA know this far better than I do, but there's you need enough data to determine trends, and some data to determine impaired or non-impaired, and that sort of thing. And if the data is too scattered, I mean, it's a little bit here and a little bit in the Lake Association, maybe in the shoebox somewhere. It's good data, but it was never entered into the system, you know, then it's like it didn't ever get collected. And so we worked with our RMD labs, and Mariah's here from Detroit Lakes, and worked with them on this project to just, let's look at the large lakes in the 3-county area and see